Well, on our previous video, we've totally cleaned these carbs out and prepped them up, but it just worked out that we didn't get a chance to do one of the most important steps anytime you do that kind of work. It's called a leak test. And on a video previous to this, we made up a little auxiliary fuel can, basically for no money. Piece of fuel line hose that adapts to the carburetors, and I'm going to show exactly how to use this, to use both the fuel can and the carbs that have been off the bike for several years, and why. I'll try to explain why it's important to do this. Now, unfortunately, we're in the middle of another little baby snowstorm, so we're going to have to do this work inside the house. Normally I do it outside the house. It's not impossible to do it, it's just more convenient if you have a bright sunny day, which obviously this is not. So just in case you haven't seen the previous video, what we're doing, we're in the middle of a project that I call the Evil Twin Project. Switching parts between two GS 1100Es. And one of the things I'm doing, I took the carburetors off this one, and they've been sitting in storage for several years, and totally cleaned them out. But one of the important steps on any carb swap is to do a leak test. Now, on my spare Kawasaki 750, this bike was being used exclusively for a track bike for many years. Now, what we did, we had carbs on here that every once in a while would just start leaking. And because I had two bikes exactly the same, and the other set didn't leak, I just switched the whole carburetor bank over, and that solved that problem. And I didn't have to do any more work other than just swap a set of carburetors. But the problem is you don't always have that choice of having a spare bike with exactly the same set of carburetors on it. So this, when we bought the FCR, and I know Luciano will remember this, and I've told this story many times. The gentleman rode the bike, we bought it, rode it up and down a block, went through the gears. It was about 10 below zero. We were freezing our ass off. We just wanted to get the bike into the truck. We never noticed it was dripping fuel. Now, the problem is with having a carburetor that leaks, it can be such a slow leak that all it does is drain gas down into this. If you have a float bowl that's not adjusted right, it could just let one cylinder run way too rich, or complicate any complicated amount of things that you can't figure out what's wrong. Now, even on a totally simple bike, totally simple, I have 3 extra sets of carburetors for this bike, and I even have a set of carburetors that are way bigger than the stock carburetors. But anytime I would switch carburetors or do any carburetor work, before I put the carburetors back on the bike, I'd like to do that leak test. Now, in this case, because at some point in the spring or the summer, we're going to just be taking this replacing the rubber inlets and outlets into the airbox, one of our motives is going to be we want to make it as easy to swap the carbs. But it's still a lot of work. It's a tremendous amount of work to swap some, and this one is probably the worst one of my in my collection. So what happens is what I don't want to do is go through all the work of putting the carburetors on the bike, turn the gas on, and they leak. Now, there's several reasons carburetors that run fine, and you put them in storage, and when you take them out of storage, they leak. And one of the things, the most common things, is that the float bowl will be sticking, and you can just tap the side of the carburetor with a screwdriver, which I've seen many people do, especially like on a BMW where they're mounted outside the bike, or a Ducati. It's easy to get to them, and all of a sudden they seal, and that's nice. So, but that's telling you that there's some contamination inside, and that it should be cleaned out so that doesn't happen on an ongoing basis. Another reason carburetors can leak is the gasket here can get dried out, or from taking it on and off many times. After a certain amount of time, I guess it compresses the most it's going to compress, and you can find it dripping from the float bowl. That's another reason. Now, in the course of my working on things here, and I wanted to show this because this will be pretty funny for, we've got boxes of, this is what I have, boxes and boxes of main jets, boxes and boxes of jet stuff for different bikes. So it's not like FCR jet kits. It's not like I've never taken carburetors apart. Now, for people that don't work on carburetors and don't work on their own bikes a whole lot, they might look at this and say, oh, what a mess. Look at all that, all these main jets, all these parts. But every one of these had some reason we were using it. And this is just one of some of the things I kept notes on when I was working on GS. This is all GS parts. You notice what I did? Makes it easier for me. I keep all the bikes labeled, which. The main jets, there are several different sizes and types that don't interchange. The needles for some of the bikes, the needle sets, like this is an FCR needle set. And this is what, if you take a GS apart, what the needles are not adjustable. You have to do it with shim washers. And sometimes you have to make your own shim washers out of aluminum. So, but here's the whole point of it, is when you do enough of this, you learn some valuable lessons. And again, I'm acting like a parrot. But doing that leak test before you spend all the time doing a 4-cylinder bike carburetor swap, worth every penny. So my point being, when you're changing jets and needles on a very regular basis, you tend to wear out the gaskets and wear out the screws and whatever. And what happens is every once in a while you put carburetors back together, and for whatever reason, it could be a lot of reasons, they'll have a leak. But the whole idea of everything here is to find that leak before you do all the work. And on this bike, this is the worst bike on the planet to get the carburetors off. This is an all-day job. Probably a couple hours for me anyway. Everything's got to come off the bike. Some of the screws are hidden underneath things that you have to have fingers like an octopus. But it's never easy. It's never easy to do this. And that's why I'm emphasizing, if you're doing a swap on a bike like this, do that simple leak test. So if you do the leak test and the carburetors are in the sink in your house on a snowy day like this, and they drip a little down the drain, it's not the end of the world. You can just push some soap down the drain and run some cold water, and that'll be the end of that. But boy, that saves you a couple hours of work, and you'll be really frustrated. Or the opposite of that, you'll be really happy when you put it back on the bike and they don't leak. And this is a very, very handy thing to have too. It's a Harbor Freight $5 item. Because a lot of times when you pull carburetors apart and you pull that little shut-off valve out, there's a little O-ring in there. And even though that shut-off valve is sealing, that little pin is moving up and down, and sometimes it sticks. It's always a good idea, if you suspect it, change the O-ring out. While you have it out, you may as well change the O-ring. Now, there's still a couple little things I want to check on this before we do the leak test. Now, what I have to do is I took an ordinary screwdriver, ground it down, and got the tip so I can get into this area. Now, my original carbs are still sealed up from the factory. I had forgotten these aren't. So before I go anywhere, and the setting that these were set at when I opened when I took this apart, they were at 2 turns out. Usually these will be a turn and a half. We'll find out right away. And in the manual, they give you no spec for this, because you're not supposed to take those little caps off, but you know, obviously everybody does. So trick is to get these out. And with gloves on, they can be tricky. Now, and this is a very critical thing of getting this passage cleaned out. Because if you notice where that passageway comes out, and I don't know if you can get this on a macro lens, but right in there, there's a thing, is a pinhole that bleeds fuel. So if this is not right, now, if this is totally clogged up, basically you're screwed. Now, if you look here, and this is always an important thing to do, has nothing to do with the leak test. This is just something I forgot to do, and I want to clean that out. That should flush it out just perfect. But that little hole in there, and now by putting this jet back in at exactly the setting, now, and again, here's the problem. If you try to get in with a regular screwdriver, it doesn't fit. This allows it to fit, and it's good to make, here's the thing, grind a screwdriver till it's a nice tight fit in that slot so you don't booger these up. These are really delicate little parts. Now once I blow a little compressed air in there, now we know we have a nice tight fit on a screwdriver handle. And these were set at 2. Well, I'm not sure 2 is just a stab in the dark, but we'll put them right back. Now what'll be interesting is when I take the stock, the carbs that are on the bike that still have the covers, I'll see what that setting is, because that'll tell me. And there's little covers on there that pop right off. But you're not supposed to take them off. You know, our lovely government, they decided your bike will run better if it's dead lean. Okay, so these we're going to go out 2, half, 1, 1.5, 2. And I'll do that, of course, to all 4 of the carburetors. Now, I did forget this, but I noticed the spring was on a bench. Don't forget to put the little spring back on. See what happens when you're shooting video and you're trying to drink coffee and do all these important things. That little spring does belong on there when that gets put back. One final little thing, I got about 10 pounds of air pressure in a, what I'm doing, just making sure I have good vacuum on all the, that's a good way to test it. You don't have a bad diaphragm. All you need is about 10 pounds of air to do that. The next step is to go out to the Tundra, which I'm really looking forward to. This is just so I can shut off the fuel. I'm not going to drip it and drool it. I do want to in the future get one of those on-off valves, but for right now, a zip tie will have to do. Can't believe it's still snowing out here. But I like to minimize the amount of time that I have gasoline in the house. So what I'm going to do, I would normally do this out here, but I'm going to get everything and make a mess. I will do this down at the cellar by the sink, put a towel down, and then when I come back out, throw the towel away. Now I'll say this again, this is the fallback position. I really would rather be working on this outside, but not happening today. So here's what I needed to do. Whoop, I put a bowl underneath this, hoping to catch some of this, and you never know, once you release this, we're going to have gas going into the carburetors, and hopefully they won't leak. And if they do leak, we'll be able to diagnose and figure out which one's leaking. Again, you never know if it's your lucky day here. Those little Viton tips, they dry out. Those little O-rings that abide the Viton tips, they dry out. Wow. This might actually be our lucky day. I hear gas. I know we have gas in the can. So I brought this down. Oh yeah, we got plenty in there. So number one, our little auxiliary tanks work pretty well. Actually, we could even put that up there. It wouldn't even matter. As long as it's higher. Not a drop. Not a drop. Luciano would be so impressed. Now, what I will do, and I don't know if this is really the only way to do this, what I'll do is, I'm just going to do it outside. I'm going to drain the float bowls. I don't want to leave these carburetors full of gas. That's one thing I don't want to do, but it doesn't look like we have any dripping, any drooling, anything coming out. The overflows, the 2 overflows are dry as a bone. I guess we're good to go. And that is the way I do a leak test before I do any changing of carburetors. That is so worth its weight in gold. Here's what we want to do is, and sometimes this will drip out when you put the carburetors upside down like this. And we're basically going to put these aside right now for, I think they're ready to go, yeah? Tells us we have fuel in every, well, I'll go through all 4 of them, but that was quite a rebuild, clean, and test. It should be ready to install come springtime. Now with all the float bowls drained, I want to make sure that, I'm paranoid about gasoline, period. I know I have a paranoia because I've seen people really get burned. Even when I was a kid, I saw somebody really get burned in real time. So here's an example. I have a fire extinguisher right around the corner here, and it's one that's not 100 years old and out of code. And this rag that I'm using, this will go right in the garbage. I don't even try to wash this stuff, and I know, because if you put one rag with gasoline on it in a load of laundry, the whole laundry stinks. It's like 1 drop of urine in a 55-gallon drum of wine. It's a 55-gallon drum of urine when you're done. Anyway, not a good example, but I'm real happy the way this project worked out. This is one of the steps on the Evil Twin project, and there are a lot more. We never don't have projects, but that was a good one. Before we put these away for now, I just can't wait till spring comes now. I want to make sure that my linkages are all pretty much in a ballpark, that all of the throttles are opening at pretty much the same time, which they are. I didn't expect that to go out of adjustment. And at the 4 chokes, our 4 chokes they're off, and that as they run out of free play, they all open at exactly the same time. Now, balancing all these, I'm going to need the Vince's gauge to do that, but I would just say that we're pretty much in a ballpark with this now, and we're even in better shape than what I thought, because I had ridden this bike before I put it in storage. I had ridden it several times, and it was really fast. It took the gas nice, and the only thing about it had that leaky oil seal, so I have used the parts off it. I think it's the biggest bargain in the world, and having these spare carbs is part of it. So whether you like these old bikes, modern bikes, super bikes, whatever, I just think it's fun sharing the information. I always enjoy learning stuff I didn't know about motorcycling, whether it's about bikes like the R1 or these older bikes that can be very challenging to work on. But what I find is when people share the information, and as I've said a million times, I'm a big YouTube fan, big fan. I've learned how to fix so many things with the information, and I know many of my friends have too, on YouTube. And I hope I've put a little bit back into the bucket here with this carburetor. Rebuild, cleaning, whatever you want to call it. Part of the Evil Twin project. Hope you enjoyed sharing it, and I can't wait for spring. I'm like a kid in a candy store now. Now, I just want it to be spring. Maybe you can make that happen. Hey, thanks for watching.